Hello, everyone. Why don't we get started? My name is Arun Sundarajan. I'm the director of the Fubon Center for Technology, Business, and Innovation. It's a really cool job because all I have to do is introduce my amazing colleagues like Foster. I don't actually have to do any work. One of the things that's been sort of different about NYU Stern over the years is that we have actually had serious AI scientists on our faculty for the last 40 years. I kid you not, and there is no other business school in the world that sort of has this history and this practice. And so it gives me great pleasure to introduce my colleague Foster Provost, who I can say without any exaggeration is the best machine learning researcher in the world, who is a business school professor. But seriously, go visit his Google Scholar page and you'll see just sort of what an accomplished machine learning scientist he is. He also runs the Demystifying AI series, which is one of the most successful, sort of incredibly successful series that Fubon has been running for the last 6 years. But the mysteries of AI abound. As we demystify it, the mysteries keep mounting. And I think today is the day where we're going to demystify it in, sort of definitively in his conversation with Pedro. So I think I've said too much already, so let me hand it over to Foster. Welcome.
Yeah, so thanks a lot, Arun. I'll take what I can get, I guess. So Arun stole a little of my thunder. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for coming. Welcome to the next installment of the Demystifying AI series. Pedro and I were joking when we were standing here a little earlier that, half a decade ago or 6 years ago, whatever it was, when we started the series, it had never occurred to me that after working on, I think successfully, on doing lots and lots of demystifying events. By the way, a lot of them, I don't know if all of them, are online, so you can, if you want some more demystification, you can go find the videos of prior events. After working hard on demystifying, AI is only more mysterious. More mystifying, right? We didn't think that actually the rate of mystification was actually higher than the rate of demystification that we could actually accomplish. So we'll keep working on that. Unfortunately, now we're competing with every journalist, venture capitalist, billionaire, professor, broadcaster, CEO who thinks they know about AI. So they're all working to mystify things even more. Frankly, a lot of what they say, I am completely mystified by what they're talking about. So tonight I have the great pleasure of welcoming my friend and colleague, Dr. Pedro Domingos. Pedro is a professor emeritus of computer science and engineering at the University of Washington, there in Seattle. He's the author of 2040, which we're gonna talk a little bit about tonight, and also of the author of The Master Algorithm, his best-selling book, which is essentially on demystifying AI. And we chatted, actually, in the inaugural segment of this series was back in early 2019 with Pedro. So welcome back. Pedro has won the SIG KDD Innovation Award, the Ichkai John McCarthy Award, two of the highest honors in data science and AI, along with a ton of other awards. He's a fellow of the Association for the Advancement of Science and the Association for the Advancement of Artificial Intelligence. He's written hundreds of technical publications about machine learning, AI, and data science, and his work has been foundational in starting several of the subfields of AI. And when I go to conferences, I'll tell you a secret, I actually don't get much from the technical papers and technical talks at conferences. I sit there and, I'm usually annoyed that they're poorly designed and poorly executed. And then I start daydreaming about something and I miss some key point and then I'm kind of lost and I don't know. So I have a solution. And that is, when you go to a conference, just look to see whatever talk Pedro is giving and forget about what it's supposed to be about. He'll end up, you'll be thinking about it on the airplane home. So without further ado, welcome Pedro. And all right, so here's what we're going to do. Pedro and I will chat for a while, and then at some point we're going to open things up for questions, and then we'll quit around 7-ish, and but still stick around and have some drinks and keep chatting amongst ourselves. And Pedro will sign some books if you brought books to sign. And so maybe you can kick things off and tell us a little bit about the book.
Well, 2040 is a satire. It's a novel. And everybody asks me, what is a professor doing writing a novel? And I'm like, I don't know. But I tell them a couple of things. One of them, actually, 2040 is the continuation of the master algorithm by another means, right? It's just like politics and more. What I found, so its goal, it has several goals, but the number one is to demystify AI. Because what I found talking about, machine learning and AI to people of all kinds, like, from CEOs and politicians to doctors, architects, is like, at the end of the day, if you want to show people what AI really is, writing a long book explaining what it is actually not the best method. The best method is to tell people a story that illustrates what AI really is. And then they will just get it in a way that they don't from an explanation. So 2040, the plot line can be summarized in one phrase. It's ChatGPT runs for president. And as you can imagine, as soon as I had this idea, the jokes just started cascading, right? And the book is I literally had the most glorious fun writing this book of anything ever, right? The book wrote itself. So my deep reason for writing the book was that I couldn't help it. But beyond that, there's a serious intent. And that intent is to illustrate, to show to people what AI really is like. So PreziBot is the presidential chatbot. It's the AI bot that runs for president. Is AI as it really is, as opposed to Terminator or Skynet, which are AI as it really isn't, right? And another motivation for me was, at one point I was complaining to Ron Howard, so like famous film director. He's directed a lot of great movies, including science fiction, and I was like, why is AI always the bad guy in the movies? Right? It's always like this vast, evil intelligence that's going to kill us. And there were other people there, and like clearly we all felt this, right? Other AI people. This was mixing a bunch of AI and artists and what. And he shrugged and said, like, well, that's the easy way to tell a good story. And if you don't like it, come up with your own story. So here it is.
So let's. So by the way, a completely objective view. I love the book. I really enjoyed it. It moves fast. It's truly funny. And it's a satire, explicitly a satire. But it's basically a satire about pretty much everything in our lives at the same time. So AI, of course, is... AI maybe is the one thing that's not satire. Right?
Interesting point.
There's representations of modern tech companies that you'll recognize. There's representations of like tech leaders, people whom you'll recognize, right? But also it takes place in this woke dystopia.
San Francisco. It takes place in San Francisco in the future. In 2040, and things have really gone downhill from now, if you can imagine.
Right. Yeah. And of course, the state of presidential campaign. So I would suggest getting it and reading it. It's a real fast read. You're not going to want to put it down. So read it before next Tuesday. It doesn't matter, by the way, who wins the election. It still will be a very relevant book. But there's even a Donald Trump-esque character, but a left-wing Donald Trump. So anyway,
exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, as a quick parenthesis, and this was by design, everything in the book, from the main characters, organizations, to the incidents, I had this principle in writing the book that, there's these things like traditional. I learned how to write science fiction back at Clarion West when I was a grad student and had a lot of free time. So I kind of, by luck, actually know how to write. But there's to some level. I'm not a writer at the end of the day, but like there's a saying that says like everything that happens, every piece of action should illustrate character and move the action forward, right? So I wanted to do that, but I also wanted it to be fun, right? Like, I want people to have laughs on the first page. But number 4, everything needed to illustrate something real, because that was my deeper purpose in writing the book. So like there are these trillionaires that are, caricatures of the tech trillionaires, There's a startup that creates Prezibot called Kumbaya, which is a spoof of, guess what, OpenAI. And the protagonist, Ethan Berntswager, is a spoof of Sam Altman with shades of Travis Kalanick and this womanizer, et cetera. And every, so it's I wrote, the book is a quick read by design because I don't think people have the attention span for more today, but I think there's a lot, I tried to pack a lot into it.
Yeah, I mean, pretty much every time you turn the page, there's some other cool little nugget. So let's actually demystify AI a little. So I saw in there 4 very different sorts of AI. So why don't we maybe I'll list them and then we can talk about them. So there was the chat AI that's running for president, Prezibot, right? Which is essentially modern generative large language-based AI, right? There's the notion of the Terminator AI, which you mentioned, right? Which is essentially a sci-fi version of AI, right? There's Prezibot 2.0 toward the end of the book, right? Which is essentially a massively crowdsourced kind of AI, and there's also good old-fashioned AI. Right, which let's get to that again. But first, let's talk about the large language model, because I think I'm interested, and maybe everyone's interested in hearing your view of what the future of these large language models is going to be, because the large language models there in 2040, in the year 2040, right, are pretty much the same as they are now. Right. There's not really all that much advancement, And so, are you saying by that you think basically that we're kind of at a maximum for the abilities of the
great point, actually. Frost is actually making I've done a bunch of these things by now, but Frost is actually nailing a bunch of things very well. And here's the thing: one of the golden rules of life that I actually advise all my students is something that I learned playing Go, is try to make moves that do more than one thing at a time, right? Because if you're playing Go and you're doing 3 things with each move and your adversary is making 1 move that does 1 thing, you win, hands down, right? So I try, for example, when I write, to have something that does more than 1 job at the same time. So this is a good example. So there is a commentary in there, I think large language models are asymptotic, which is why in 2040 they're still the same, right? The story opens with the first debate where Ethan is terrified that Prezibot is going to screw up by starting to hallucinate, and that's the end of the campaign, right? So I'm saying, again, if we don't do anything, this is what we're going to continue with. At the same time, right, by design, so an element of 2040 is this very classic thing to do in science fiction, which is take today's trends and just extrapolate them to the limit, right? And again, Foster very well pointed out, my depiction of AI there in the form of Prezibot is actually very accurate, but on purpose, because I'm trying to combat the inaccurate representations. At the same time, of course, the point of this is to hold up a mirror to today. A lot of the AI and other things in 2040 are not that different from today, because what I'm really trying to do, let me put it this way. Animal Farm is not about animals or farming. And 2040 isn't about 2040, it's about 2024. It's a caricature, and a caricature often lets you perceive things better. So it's doing these 2 things at the same time.
But so let's talk just a little more about this, because one of the things that I'm sure you feel, and I've been building besides research, I've been actually building products with machine learning and AI for more than 30 years as well, right? And one of the things that always strikes me is people's ability to do science fiction extrapolation in their minds, because of sort of what they see today, right? And so a lot of what people write, actually, if not just write. I mean, you go, I'm on the investment review board for the NYU Venture Fund. I work on, people are basically coming and their story is well, this is what it can do today. Just think what it can do next year or the year after that. It's that's not the way AI works. right? That's not the way AI works. First of all, there's usually a learning curve that just flattens out at some point, and then that's like the rule. There's no cases that we've ever run into where that, actually, theoretically, it can't.
Every time you see an exponential, realize that it's an S-curve.
Yeah.
And then Ray Kurzweil's book will look entirely different.
Right, yeah. Right, and so, it seems to me like basically what by the way, if you're investing based on this idea, if you're investing in AI based on this idea that, just think how good it's going to be in 3 years. Good luck with that,
There's this thing that is irresistible to people, including many fine researchers, which is to anthropomorphize AI. As soon as they see the AI doing something that looks vaguely human, they immediately think like, it's going to do all these other things. But isn't, in fact, it's sort of like the number one thing I'm trying to combat in this book is like, so Prezibot in some ways is the center of the novel, but by design it's a non-character. It can parry with the other one in the debates and whatnot and looks, sounds, very eloquent, but at the end of the day, there's no there. Right? And that's it. We need to look through the ChatGPTs of the world through to the people who are actually controlling and building the AI. And I think this is maybe the single most important way in which AI needs to be demystified. Is like we got to stop projecting these human things onto it, like emotions and consciousness. Apart from capabilities, like emotions and the will to power and consciousness and lambda is sentient and whatnot. None of that is going on there.
So is this still your, if you could demystify one thing, would this be it?
Yeah, I mean,
that's what it was. That was what it was 6 years ago.
No, I often tell people, short things like.
What am I talking about? This don't anthropomorphize.
Yeah, don't anthropomorphize AI.
Yeah.
See, you got to see again.
See it as a statistic, massive.
Yeah, the mass algorithm is like 300 pages explaining this, but let me just give you a character in a novel that looks human from the outside. Acts human. It was designed, right? It's designed as a composite of the best-looking, most seductive, trustworthy senators and whatnot.
Yeah.
Which again was based on something that I saw on Wired years ago, which was like a composite portrait of all 100 U.S. senators, and it's like. You never saw that face, but you've seen it, and it looks so reliable, trustworthy. It's like so. Prezibot was designed like that.
Right. Yeah. So I think if I had to pick one thing, it would basically be this idea that don't take the amazing demos that AI people can make to inform your thinking about the products that people can make with AI.
No, absolutely. So,
and this is sort of
completely. I mean, so
book, right?
By the way, like something I tweeted some months ago that became very popular when the latest super impressive OpenAI demo came out was, remember that a demo is the farthest you can get from the truth without lying. Don't believe anything you see the AI do until you've tested it yourself and gone back and forth with it. By the way, Prezibot starts as a demo. So there's 2 grad students at Stanford who come up with this new algorithm called intelligence propagation. And of course, they think they've solved AI, because we all do when we're young, right? And then they do a startup, and the startup isn't going very well. So they're like, we need a stunt to make the stunt that came up with is to have a chatbot run for president.
And I want to say that from my point of view of basically making a beware case, right? It's not just the stunt demos. So by the way, you want to see a really cool stunt demo? We did a prior Demystifying AI where it was during the pandemic and we were on Zoom and we did a Zoom interview with an AI chatbot, But actually, not just like typing and stuff. It was actually a person who talked, and we did an hour-long data science interview, which was actually like a real data science interview, right? And we had them answer technical questions. They had to do math on the whiteboard. They had to code. They had to answer questions about can you tell me in a past job, you had a problem with a coworker, what did you do about it and stuff like that, right? Go check it out. I mean, but it's a demo.
This is pre-ChatGPT.
Right. It was just, we started it pre-ChatGPT. It was just after ChatGPT came out when we did it, right? But it is, it turns out it's absolutely astounding. And if you concluded from it that that the AI could be a data scientist, you would be completely wrong, right? Which is part of our point.
So beware of the interview.
Right. Yeah. Right. But I mean, I think what I was going to say was that that was made as a demo and stuff like that. But there are also demos that are essentially work in progress for people who are doing the real work. I actually think the ChatGPT demos were kind of like that. But I mean, when we were here last, the hype, that was the beginning of 2019. In 2015, we had headlines that were very similar to what we see today about how this AI is going to completely change many industries, right? And it wasn't about generative AI at all. It was about self-driving cars. Right?
And tomorrow won't be about generative AI. It'll be about something else, but it'll still be happening.
But if you think about self-driving cars, right? So I went back and actually, I'm writing a little caution case for the next edition of my book, right? That I'm going to use this as an example. Why? Because they were saying the exact same things that they're saying about generative AI now, right? And then it was funny because you read this. There was an article in Fortune, I think, that was citing Gartner had them at the top of the hype cycle, right? So already they're at the top of Gartner's hype cycle. And if you know Gartner's hype cycle, you know what comes after the top of the hype, right? Is the trough of disillusionment, right?
No, by the way, so I have this theory of the AI Gartner cycle, which is, so I was trained as an electrical engineer, right? And there we have this notion of underdamped and overdamped systems. An overdamped system, when it suffers a change, a step function, it smoothly converges to the new state. If it's underdamped, it oscillates. And the Gartner curve is, and the hype is the amplifier, the gain of the amplifier. Right. But the thing about AI is that the potential for hype is so great that it doesn't just oscillate once, it oscillates multiple times. So we haven't seen the last AI winter or AI spring.
So in the Fortune article, they're like, now, come on. This isn't right around the corner. It's going to be 10 or 15 years before we have self-driving cars, right? That was 2015, so we're 10 years in. Do we have self-driving cars all over the place? In fact, self-driving cars right now are a demo, right? There's 600 self-driving cars out there driving on the roads on very, very controlled situations, right? I mean, there's 100,000 cabs
I'll tell you a funny,
in New York City.
Funny story. So Elon Musk, Chris Anderson, the curator of TED, interviewed him a couple years ago and said, so Elon, every year since 2014, you've been saying that we're going to have full self-driving next year, right? And I'm like, damn right. And Elon says, oh yeah, I realize now that it was harder than I thought. I'm like, wow, Elon is finally learning, right? And
he says
amazing.
Next year.
No, yes, exactly. So then Chris, she's like, says, so okay, so now, with your newfound wisdom, this is my parenthesis, when do you think we will have full self-driving next year?
All right, so enough of that. By the way, the first self-driving cars on public roads were in the 80s. And in 1996, one drove from Pittsburgh to LA.
Alvin, no hands across America.
Right, okay, so.
Literally, that is what's called, no hands across America.
We've been waiting a long time. I'm not an AI skeptic, right? I'm just saying let's be careful here. All right, so Terminators.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
this is a political campaign, right? And each side needs to decide how to attack the other, right? I had a lot of fun with a bunch of stuff writing the book, including studying Native American code. So the quick parenthesis, the Democratic candidate, as Foster very well put it, is a left-wing version of Trump, which again does several useful things. One is it's the best possible foil to a robot running for president, right? It also illustrates this point, which populists can be on the left and the right just as well. People in America maybe don't realize, but in Latin America, they're like, well, of course, think of AMLO, right, in Mexico. So he's a left-wing, Trump, but he wants to abolish the United States. It's his agenda. He's actually, again, another level of commentary. He's a fake Lakota chief. He's a social media influencer who did this. He did his own stunt, which was he pretended to invade America from his reservation and ride all the way to DC, right? And of course, this was all faked, but then Wolf News played it up because it got their base riled up and increased their ratings. So this guy has become famous in his own right. So his agenda is to end America and give it all back to give the land back to the indigenous tribes, right? How could you disagree with that? Right? Again, this is a caricature of tendencies that we already see. But on the other hand, right, like Prezibot, right, the line of attack that they pick against it is they have this debate. Should we pick Prezibot as a stooge of the rich, right? because it was this trillionaire, who's of course a spoof of Elon Musk, that decided to back it, as a result of which it wins the Republican primary, right? It's like, and Raging Bull wants to paint him as a stooge of the rich. But then the campaign manager, who's just this very down-to-earth, savvy operator, is like, nah, people are bored with that. We should attack him as Terminator, right? Hollywood has laid the ground for us to go like, this guy is going to destroy humanity, right? Like they create these ads with like an army of Prezibots coming and destroying everything. And they have this big fight, right, about what to do. She wins, but we'll see how but then here's the thing. It turns out very badly for them because of Prezibot 3.0, which we'll just talk for a second. But in the meantime, what this is illustrating is like all these, most of the book is seen from the side of the Prezibot campaign. And we already know that this attack that they're doing on Prezibot of him being Terminator is complete fiction. Prezibot is a bunch of bumbling fools programming a buggy machine, and there's nothing there to kill humanity. Having said that, a large part of the novel is Ethan goes on this long odyssey through San Francisco, which maybe we'll touch on. But at one point he asks this, I forget what it is, maybe it's like, there's a self-driving truck there that has a driver that he uses to escape. It has a driver because they're using him for liability purposes. But he asks him, so who are you going to vote for, right? And he's like this grumpy old white guy, very, because he used to own the truck, blah, blah. He says but then he goes if we elect, a Raging Bull, it's the end of America. But if we elect Prezibot, it's the end of humanity, so we got to choose the least of evils.
So on the Terminator thing, right, people who pretend, for example, won Nobel Prizes for AI are...
the comedy continues.
Believe that there is a big danger here. Not as an author of this book, but as an AI expert, I mean, what's going on here? What really is the danger?
We were talking about this just before coming here, and I highly respect Jeff Hinton. He's a great researcher, but he's also a very naive human being, right? And the thing is again, a big part of why I wrote this book is that AI, on the one hand, is making amazing progress, and there are very good reasons to be excited. But it's also such a comedy of errors. It's like one farcical thing happening after another. And this is just the latest one, is say what? They gave the Nobel Prize in Physics to Jeff Hinton and John Hopfield, right? I mean, the Nobel Prize is supposed to be for great physics, but Hopfield networks and Boltzmann machines are neither great nor physics. So what the heck is going on?
So, I mean...
There's theories of that.
Do you understand what it is that they see as this danger?
No, of course. It's the anthropomorphization, right? The whole fear that people like Jeff and Yosh and all have is if you see, this is what the word to use is, this is another species. If you think of AI and see it as another species with all the same impulses that we have, and it's they're smarter than us, but they also want to take over the world just like we do, so we're in trouble. And I'm hell no. And Jan LeCun and Jan Doing, there's a lot of, the silent majority of the AI community thinks this is all ridiculous, but they're not the ones screaming to the media. And of course, the media likes scare stories, but it's no, I mean AI is not like that. AI is something that we control imperfectly. And this is actually a very important technical point, is intelligence and control are different things. And again, the anthropomorphization gets in the way. For example, let's suppose we create a system to cure cancer, right? We want it to be infinitely intelligent and cure cancer sooner. Just because it's infinitely intelligent doesn't mean it's a danger to us. It's not going to change its reward function and decide to start killing patients instead.
Well, the best way to cure cancer in humans is to just kill all the humans.
No, that's, again, the farce continues, right? This is the paperclip argument, right? There are people who seriously, I'll give you a concrete example. You guys know about SB 1047? This bill that almost passed in 10. This is what it's inspired by, right? And then, for example, they have these things. This is actually another in Element 24. They're every AI, and that bill almost passed until Gavin Newsom vetoed it. It says every AI must have a kill switch. Right, because if it starts to misbehave, and in fact, the MacGuffin in this novel is Prezibot's kill switch. So Arvin, his buddy Arvin, who's the CTO, creates this app very quickly on a cell phone by which Ethan can shut down or take control of Prezibot. And Ethan in that first debate is literally sweating, holding onto the kill switch, getting ready to start talking over Prezibot when he starts saying stupid things. But then there's a chapter, like chapter 2, I think is called, Where's the Panic Button? Because Ethan loses the panic button. And the entire, like the next, half of the book is Ethan's desperate scramble to get hold of the panic button, and everybody fighting over it. So again, this illustrates several things. One is like, putting a kill switch on an AI, first of all, it's solving an imaginary problem for the most part, but also it creates a whole new attack vector by which things can go wrong, right? Like, I don't know if you guys saw this cartoon that's like a guy sitting in there saying like, AI is so dangerous, only I should be trusted with controlling it, right? And so the book illustrates like the kill switch is what really the novel is about. It's not Prezibot, it's Prezibot's kill switch, and it's the struggle for control. And in fact, then Prezibot 2.0 is actually, at one point Ethan has this epiphany, with the help of this, police officer that's the last one left in San Francisco. He realized that, wait, everybody's fighting over the kill switch. Why should I have the kill switch? The CEO of Kumbaya. Everybody should have a kill switch in their hand, in a democracy. Everybody should have control. So they turn the kill switch into Prezi app. And they give Prezi app to everybody. And now everybody in the country can press that button and start talking to Prezibot. And then it's crowdsourced real-time AI. And under all the disasters and fun that happens in the book, there's this real message about where I think AI should go. And it's precisely real-time crowdsourced AI. And now, for example, we can have a much better functioning democracy because then there's an interesting process, right? There's an interesting mechanism design by which if we're all talking to Prezibot and telling it different things that we know and telling different things that we want, how does it decide what to do? But hopefully, if that is done properly, we actually have a much better mechanism than the one we have today, which is the Constitution, which was designed for 18th century technology, and now we have AI.
I don't know if you guys are familiar with citizens' assemblies, right? So the idea of citizens' assemblies is you quasi-randomly actually choose some citizens, and you get them together to sit down and try to hammer out a solution to a problem that's mutually acceptable, right? And it works. It ends up working really well. Right. Actually, one of our former PhD students, Manuel Arriaga, is in Portugal and has been doing this in Portugal, right? And so the reason it works is because of the quasi-random selection of the people. And so the people that you get in politics generally are the people who are most interested in getting their agenda satisfied. Whereas if you just pick regular people,
this famous saying, I think it was William Buckley said, I'd rather be governed by the first 3 people in the New York phone book than the Harvard faculty.
Yeah. So this is kind of like taking this notion to the modern scaled up version, which I think there's a couple papers that are sort of talking about this, but it seems to be relatively new.
No, and Portugal is an example. There are actually a whole bunch of very interesting experiments about this kind of crowdsourced democracy going on around the world. And in fact, one of the things that I found while preparing the book was that, for example, honestly, I don't know how well, you decide how you take it, but an AI bot ran for mayor in Tokyo several years ago and came in 3rd. There's an AI running for mayor of Cheyenne, Wyoming right now. And this is a human, a librarian, who says, I will be the representative of the AI and just do what the AI says. In fact, part of why I decided to publish the book now was that so much that I had in it just kept coming true one after another that I'm I gotta publish it now or it's just gonna become outdated.
By the way, I'll tell you what the danger is of the modern AI, right? And it goes back to your number one demystification dimension, right? The big danger is that people think it's way smarter than it is. And they hook it up to control some system that can have catastrophic consequences. So they hook it up and they think, oh, this is so, they hook it up to the nuclear arsenal or something like that, and then, of course, it's not as intelligent as they think it is, and it makes all manner of mistakes. And by the way, the key to succeeding with AI applications is always figuring out how to actually deal with the mistakes that it will make. Every AI, right? And so that's what I think is.
No, this is another
is
crucial point, right? In fact, I'll say this maybe after don't anthropomorphize. The second one is the people who are worried about AI dangers, whether short-term or long-term, and they fight with each other a lot because they each think they're distracting attention from the real ones. And to me, this is very entertaining, and also, take out the popcorn. But they all have one thing in common, which is they want to limit the intelligence of the AI. They want to put these guardrails and fail-safes and blah, 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 blah on it. And here's the thing. What is unsafe is stupid AI. There's nothing unsafer than stupidity. And again, Prezibot is the ultimate illustration of this. There's all this stuff that goes very badly wrong, no spoilers, partly because there's not much intelligence there. So if you want safe AI, if you remember nothing else from this talk, remember this. If you want, other than Prezibot versus Terminator, if you want safe AI, the more intelligent you make it, the better. AI, and this is not a hypothetical long-term future danger, it's like today. AI is already making lots of decisions in the world and many needless mistakes. People have this paranoia that computers are going to get too smart and take over the world. But the real problem is that they're too stupid and they've already taken over the world.
So speaking of taking over the world, that brings us to our fourth different kind of AI. The fourth kind of AI is good old-fashioned AI, right? And by the way, McKinsey did a generative AI report, I think about 1.5 years ago, where they actually were estimating the economic potential of generative AI, and they estimated $3 to $4 trillion annually of economic potential, and then you could take that up to 8 if you add in some other things, right? But they said, oh, by the way, the economic potential of good old-fashioned AI is like $10 to $20 trillion a year, So basically, and so in the book, right, it's really good old-fashioned AI that's running the world via the big tech companies, right?
No, yeah. So this is another thing that I'm always telling people, right? Is these days, ChatGPT is not by any measure the most, ChatGPT, chatbots or agents or whatever you want to call them, but by far the most important application of AI today is things like, recommender systems, models that help you make decisions. This just dwarfs, this is not to poo-poo the future and whatnot of generative AI and whatnot, but realistically, by far, the most important part of AI today is these things that don't get nearly as much of the press, right? And so in the novel, there's this other very important element, which is there's this company called HappyNet, and HappyNet is the everything app, which is what every tech billionaire in the U.S. wishes they had. It exists in China, of course, but in America, no one can pull all that together. So there is this HappyNet, and what they do, and again, this of course is a spoof of real things. The guy who found it, there are 3 trillionaires in the book. One of them we already spoke about is the Elon Musk, Peter Thiel parody. And then there's this other one, Dave Newald, who what he did was invented this thing called the neurosniffer. The neurosniffer is a little chip that you put in your phone, and then it smells your pheromones and figures out what is your state of mind. And then they can decide, and he gives them a demo of this because when he's trying to acquire them, it shows them look at how powerful you are. And then it decides, right, what to do to you to make you thirsty for the beer.
What content to serve you in order to make you more angry.
And this company is by far the biggest company in the world today. It dominates the stock market. There's this thing in San Francisco called the Flower, right? Because it's, of course, a spoof of the Salesforce Tower, only 3 times as tall, right? And it's got 7 petals, which are solar panels, of course, at the top, each of which is to represent a different division of HappyNet. Each division caters to a different one of the 7 deadly sins. So the lust division is all about the dating apps. The greed division is all about the finance apps. The sloth division is about Netflix, blah, blah. You get the idea, right? So this company caters to everything using precisely the old-fashioned analytics that what is actually running the world today and in 2040.
Yeah, I've done a lot of work in this area myself, but I'm not sure how happy I am. What's the most intelligent AI that's out there now? It's not ChatGPT, right? It's the online ad targeting ecosystem. By far, my wife thinks the phone's listening to her. My contractor thinks the phone's listening. It's not listening to you, right? It's just a really, really smart system that figures out that this, this is something that you'd like. I think it's sad in a way, but that's the fact.
I mean, indeed. And so, like, another element of the novel is that there's this resentment among the people against companies like HappyNet because they feel they're being manipulated. And of course, then they are, right? And this comes, of course, to again, no spoilers, but clearly, Newell is going to get his comeuppance in the novel. But there's also another twist to this, which again, I think is important and underappreciated. These technologies are actually far, maybe good news or bad news, depending on how, but they're actually far less effective at manipulating you than you think they are. And in fact, when Newell does this demo for them, it tries to inspire fear, then this guy winds up inspiring anger, and the guy smashes the phone. This is a guy far away in the shopping mall in Minnesota that he's trying to control. And this is a preview of what's actually going to happen later, right? And the thing is, at one point there is this, this is actually many people's favorite chapter of the whole book. It's called Only We Can Save the Planet. And there's a fundraising dinner for Prezibot that is held by Dave Newell, the CEO of HappyNet, where the other guy comes, John Ungald. So imagine Mark Zuckerberg, again, this is uncanny. Imagine Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk at a fundraising dinner for, say, some random candidate that I will not name, right? And then they get into a fight. And the fight... This was before the whole cage match thing came out, right? But they start competing about who's doing the most to save the planet. Oh, your geoengineering scheme is crap, and blah blah. And I'm gonna get to Mars before you, but I'm gonna get to Jupiter before you, and blah 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 blah, right? But at one point, right, they have this argument, which again is fun, but is also true. Is then Ungald points out to him your HappyNet is a fraud. You tell people you control them really, really well, but you don't. Your thing barely works. What actually works is that you have all these thousands of data scientists eking out little signals and then telling people, so as part of their heated discussion, I actually tell people a whole bunch of actual truths about what happens. Of course, they don't tell people that their stuff doesn't, you can measure, the amount of, you spend, $50,000 a year, right? And you are worth to Google and Facebook and Meta, which are by far the biggest two, maybe a few $1,000s a year. So that's how much of your mind they control. Is a very tiny amount, right? And then, of course, in the novel, this then degenerates into a fist fight between them where they throw lobster and caviar at each other and have to be separated by their bodyguards. Right. But underneath all the comedy, it's addressing this.
So I want to go to see if people have questions in a minute. And so the question of whether trillionaires really are the only ones. If we look at governments and their ability to do anything these days, we'll save that maybe for the once we go to the bar. But I did want to actually touch on the future of work because in the book there are, of course, the trillionaires. They're the engineers who have pretty good lives, right? There's actually the political consultants, which I thought of Carville and
Karl
Mary
Rove,
Maitland, right?
You guys know Karl Rove?
I was thinking of James Carville and Mary Maitland because the Republican and the Democratic won't hook up, right? Yeah. But then everyone else seems to have a pretty sucky life, serving the AI, right? Doing the jobs one of them is a music listener who's listening to AI-generated music to see whether she hums along.
For a living. So there's this person he runs into that he goes through this derelict area of San Francisco, and then runs into this person who, what does she do? She's poor, right? But what she does for a living is listen to music. And why does she make a living listening to music? It's because the way the companies make music then is that they have generative AI generate tunes, and then they push it out to these people to listen to. And the ones that, you listen to 100 things this morning, and the one that you're humming at the end of it is the one that looks better. So then they vary that. This is like machine learning with crowdsourcing at the same time. The downside of this, and then Ethan goes to her, wow, that doesn't seem like a bad way to make a living. And she says yeah, except I can't stay in music anymore.
Yeah. And by the way, there are lots and lots, more and more people every year already who are actually working, serving the AI masters, essentially. And so what do you think about the future? Yeah. What do you really think about the future of work? We already have a system where for various reasons, not AI reasons, right? We have this bifurcation of the people who are doing just fine with their jobs and people who are not any longer.
Yeah. So,
but also we have this notion that many of the people who don't have these sort of jobs where they can still make whatever.
Yeah, and then another example is the guy who's driving the self-driving truck just so he can take the blame if it crashes. But I mean, but the serious I don't know if guys you've heard this saying. Mark Andreessen says that in the future there'll be two kinds of people: the ones that tell the computers what to do, and they're the ones that are told by the computers what to do. And this is actually very insightful, but it's actually only halfway. What is actually, my prediction is what's going to happen in the future, in fact already happens today, is that in all of our lives we are both. We are all both. So for example, let's suppose you want to date, right? You go on a dating site, right? You input some information, or swipe or like, and the machine learning system tells you who to date. Right? I mean, 60% of marriages start on the internet today, right? There are children who wouldn't exist if the computer had, the machine learning algorithm was the village matchmaker, right? This is the highest level of decision you can imagine making. But then, you get together, you say let's go have dinner. And then you use Yelp to decide where to have dinner, right? And then you drive your car to dinner, but the GPS actually tells you where to go, right? And at the end of and then at the lowest level, there's all these, machine learning systems controlling optimizing the injection and whatnot. So what has happened at the end of the day, after you did your date, is that we're all cyborgs. There are all these intermediate layers where you control the AI, which then controls you, which you then control. And this is the reality. There's going to be humanity as a whole, right? Again, this is part of what Prezibot 3.0 is illustrating. It's not just you're either telling the AI to do or being told. It's we're going to be a really, really deeply interwoven fabric of human and computer, right? Humanity as a whole is going to be a collective cyborg, not just I have my own procedure or something like this. Is how society is going to work.
Yeah, we think of cyborg in the old sense, which is actually physical integration, but why can't it be virtual integration?
Yeah, we're all cyborgs already, and it's only going to be more so in the future.
Yeah. So let's see if you guys have any questions. Raise your hand and then wait for the mic, because this is going to be, it is being recorded, and so we'd like to have the questions on as well. So we have a question here, whose hand was up, and then I think one here and one in each bank of chairs.
Thank you. So the question I have is about a danger of Gen AI, which I fear the most, which is death by Gen AI slop. Right? So I'm getting spam emails that are much worse than the Nigerian prince emails, and more creepy at the same time, and they are less effective. So my fear is that in the future, a lot of content will be AI generated, Gen AI generated. It'll be objectively worse. And how do we distinguish or have a human-generated seal versus a Gen AI seal? And what are the ways where our lives will be objectively worse? Not maybe an existential risk, but just worse.
Okay, so good question. I personally am less worried about Gen AI slop than most people are. And this is for a couple of different reasons. One is that the bottleneck in generating slop is not that we don't have machines to do it. We already have vast, as far as whatever the 50s was it that said 99% of all science fiction is crud, right? Which is true, but the other 1% is what matters, right? So the bottleneck is our attention. Right? With this information and whatnot, yes, we'll have more slop, more disinformation with AI, but we've already asymptoted at what we can absorb, right? Now, you're saying that is going to be objectively worse. I actually don't know. I think in many respects, computer-made art will be better than the humankind, and we as consumers of art will actually be better off. So I personally, I'm not really terribly worried about can I label this thing as being AI-made or human-made? If it speaks to me, now there's a level at which knowing that there's a human experience behind is important, and in that case I will care. But for the most part, I think in some ways that's a question that doesn't really worry me. Again, more importantly, the future of art is already, and I know people doing this, is it's such an intricate mix of, so for example, in an earlier life I was a musician, Foster still is, right? And I was always fascinated with this notion of what makes a catchy tune, right? And I believe that you can have, and we're already seeing the first steps of this, I would like to in the future produce a system called inspiration that you're Sting, you're Bono, you're brilliant, but you're now a little decadent, and you're not inspired anymore. But you're still Sting, right? You're still Bono, right? Imagine being super inspired. The AI can be the inspiration for you. So what you're going to get at the end of the day is the stuff that comes out is such an intricate mix of the human and the AI that you can't label it as human or AI, and you don't really care. Another very important aspect of this is that which again I allude to in 2040, is we hear all this talk about like how AI is the enemy of democracy because of disinformation. Like the World Economic Forum did this poll like this year, and according to the experts it polled, like this was the #1 danger in the world, or #2 was AI-generated disinformation, right? And here's the reality today, right? There isn't that much AI-generated disinformation yet, although again, I'm not minimizing that, but the reality today is that like by number one, our #1 tool to combat disinformation is AI. Without AI, people like Jan LeCun will tell you, right? Like we would be flooded with disinformation. So AI is democracy's best friend and protector.
Human-generated disinformation.
Yeah, exactly. AI is our guardian against like without the AI filtering out most of the disinformation, that comes to you on social media, we'd be submerged in it.
I mean, if you think about it, like when I was even in college, information that you got was generally really, really good. Comparatively speaking, right? Now, almost everything that's out there is crap, right? So, okay, we take that, maybe AI might actually, exacerbate that, but that's a problem we already have, is how to actually find the stuff that's not crap, right? The email, right? Back in, when email started, right? Pretty much everything I got was an email I wanted to read, right? Now, almost none of them are emails that, that I want to read, right? So, it seems like what we really need is the systems to help us find crap, not AI-generated crap, but all the crap.
And more than that, there's actually another key point here. I'm glad this came up with this question. It's like, so, once upon a time, there were no mass media. You talked with the people in your tribe, right? And then there were mass media like, network TV, right? Or publishers, right? And they sifted out the bad information, which was good, right? But on the other hand, this was a very artificial and unfortunate bottleneck to our capability to communicate with each other. Now, the internet and social media made that go away. But the problem now, of course, is that we are submerged in crap. The solution to this is not to tamp down on the social media or the AI or try to censor it or restrict teenagers from it, is to improve it. It's to improve the algorithm's ability to select and synthesize information. And again, this is Presibot 3.0. So this is like the message that I'm trying to give in this book is like, don't tamp down on social media, improve them. So like the old media are dying because the gatekeepers, the walls have fallen down. There are no gates to keep anymore. And yes, there's a lot of barbaric stuff happening, but the solution is that the new media that are still immature, they need to become more mature. And so like the internet calls for AI, and the AI is finally what's going to give us like the best. This is what I would like to have, right? Is not go back to the 50s, is to have AI. I mean, let me put it this way. The optimal Twitter algorithm would be so amazing to have if I could have it. Just showing me, like I want to learn. Like, I don't want to hear any more entertainment stuff or stuff about Trump from either directions. Just teach me new stuff. So we should be able to do that.
Liz, there was a question. Oh, you have it. Thanks.
Hello. I'm Cristiano, big fan of you on X, and looking forward to your cage match with Professor LeCun. I wanted to talk a bit on something you touched on earlier, which is regulation and potentially premature regulation. SB 1047 almost passed were it not for a veto. To what extent do you think kind of regulation within the U.S. can hamper development, can hamper a move towards openness, and then can enable, I guess, regulatory capture of the existing tech behemoths over AI specifically?
A great question. And in fact, I am truly more scared of AI regulation than I am of AI. I'm not convinced that there are any mortal dangers lurking in AI right now. There are dangers that unfortunately are not getting enough attention, like incompetent AI versus evil AI. But at this stage, right, a lot of what these regulations are trying to guard against are imaginary problems. In the meantime, the regulation itself will do great harm. I mean, I was just talking with someone, the other day, like in Europe, like, so I'm usually from Europe. There's this thing called the AI Act there right now, which outlaws things like emotion recognition, facial recognition, predictive policing. And it's like, how can an AI be socially intelligent if it's not allowed to recognize emotion? This is just stupid. And in fact, this person was saying that, in America, companies ask, what shall we do in AI? And this, I was actually, so Yesterday morning before flying here, I was in a Zoom call with the Prime Minister of Portugal trying to get advice from a bunch of Portuguese scientists and entrepreneurs on AI. And somebody literally said this. Like, entrepreneurs in America ask, or companies, what shall we do with AI? Here in Europe, we ask, what are we allowed to do with AI? Right? And it's like, and you saw, if that law had come to pass, right? There are the large companies can afford the blah, 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 the lawyers, the process, the blah. The startups can't. I literally know, again, for example, we have friends that have startups, for example, in Portugal where I'm from, they're like, we don't have the manpower to do this, and we're not going to do it because of these regulations. So the notion that somehow these regulations will not have a... Part of my criticism of people like, Joshua, Benjo and Jeff and whatnot, and Jan LeCun, on the other hand, actually understands this, was that, like, they act as if regulation has no cost, as if regulation is a free lunch, as if there's no such thing as regulatory capture, as if there's nothing as unintended consequences. Oh, come on, wake up to the real world. It's not that we shouldn't have regulations, it's that before you pass regulations, you need to think about these things. And often the regulations that you want to pass will be different. And there's another, even more neglected point, which is this. What AI regulation, first of all, AI per se should never be regulated. Trying to regulate AI is like trying to regulate mathematics. It's like, oh, people could use calculus to design missiles that they will throw at us, so let us restrict access to calculus, right? We shouldn't let Iranians learn the chain rule. It's like, come on, get real, right? Or or saying like Python could be used to, or JavaScript. We should, put guardrails around JavaScript. Like, the applications of AI should be regulated qua applications, like self-driving cars, by the agencies that regulate cars. And medical applications, right? So regulating AI per se just shouldn't be done, right? And moreover, it would be premature, right? But then once you regulate AI, right, you actually have to take into account that the regulations are going to have, side effects. They're going to be prone to regulatory capture, and in many cases, so the guiding principle in regulating AI, and this is what I talk to like policymakers and congressional staffs and run about, is like the guiding principle is very simple. Is that like the laws as they genuinely, and in Europe as well, they want to know what should we do about AI, right? This, I'm glad they're asking that question. But the number one answer to this is like this. All the laws we have today were made under the assumption that decisions are made by humans, right? Because that's what they were. The change today is that more and more decisions are going to be made by AI. And the question that we want to ask is not what new regulation is needed, is how does regulation need to change? Some new things will have to be in place. Others can be modified and should be. Because AIs and humans, again, this gets back to the whole cyborg thing, we tend to make different kinds of mistakes and have different kinds of biases. And now what we have are laws protecting against the human mistakes and biases, but not the AI's ones. And unfortunately, what a lot of this AI regulation ethics crowd is doing is like they are projecting the homunculus fallacy, right? They are projecting it's like they look at an AI as a little man there with all the biases of a human being, but the AI does not have those biases, right? So just to pick one small example, the whole notion of disparate impact makes no sense when you're talking about AI. Disparate impact was introduced into the law because proving intent was very hard. But with AI, we don't have that problem. If you look at how much stuff about AI is today, attempts to regulate had to do like disparate impact, the people who are trying to do this, they just don't know the history or don't want to know. The problem with AI is not disparate impact. The problem with AI is that when it's as a rule of thumb, if you see a media story about this AI is discriminating so bad against this group, it's because the AI, doesn't have enough data or has noisy data or has stuff that we know very well. It's like no evil person was designing the AI with the intent to discriminate against the group, right? Jan got into trouble for this at one point. I said, there's all this work, for example, the AI discriminates against blacks more than whites. And he said on Twitter, if 90% of your sample is of one race and 10% is of the other, it's just it's basic statistics that you're going to have a better model of the larger sample, right? And boy, did they ever come down on him and try. So this is just a small example.
Yeah, we had one more question. So the mic's right here. Oh, up, right in the front row here. Thanks.
Thank you. Since we're at a business school, what industries do you think will benefit the most in the future, even past 2040, from AI?
As a first approximation, I think this is the beauty of AI and why I'm in it, is that there is no industry that it will leave untouched. I mean, I often, suggest to people that they do this exercise. The Bureau of Labor Statistics has a list of occupations. There's tens of thousands of them, like let's say 100,000 numbers. Go look at every one of those and think about what AI can do in it. In fact, my advice to people is like, figure out in your job, and again, the whole another one of those dangers that are over hyped is like the AI jobs apocalypse. And again, this has been well studied by now. You're probably familiar with this. Like, a job consists of multiple tasks, and AI will typically be very good at some of them and bad at the others, right? And again, here's another very good thing to remember. Like, to a first approximation, the major impact of AI can be described in one sentence, is it's going to greatly lower the cost of intelligence. So now ask yourself this question with every industry, with every job. Like, if the cost of intelligence goes down by a lot, what happens, right? And the first thing that happens, Economics 101, is the demand goes up. So on the contrary, we're going to have more jobs, not fewer. But what's going to, again, it's this saying that it's not man versus machine. You're not going to be replaced by machines. It's the people who don't use AI are going to be replaced by the people who use AI. Which one do you want to be, right? Now, what happens is that, and again, I think, from a strategic point of view for any company, this is very important, is that AI is going to penetrate different industries at different rates. So the wavefront, right? Like, there's this wavefront of AI automating things, but the wavefront is extremely uneven in different directions. Right? And so what are the things to look out for? Number one, Moravec's paradox. I don't know if people are familiar with Moravec's paradox, but it's this very important notion that we have learned over and over again in AI at our cost, but people keep ignoring because, this is what we try to do is, demystify, is what is easy for humans is hard for AI and vice versa. And we think that what is easy for humans is going to be easy for AI, but it's not. So for example, blue-collar work is harder to automate than white-collar work. I used to have a slide, I still do, but I've had it for a while. There's about more. There is a table of hard for AI versus easy for AI. And one of the lines in there was creativity versus reliability. And I said to people, it's easier for AI to be creative than it is to be reliable. And they were like, what are you smoking? Creativity is an unfathomable, mysterious human thing, and reliability is what computers are all about. And at this point, I don't need to make that case. We all know that. So there's Moravec's paradox is one aspect. Another aspect, these things maybe are banal, but they're actually very important, is AI will penetrate first in industries where there is a lot of available data to learn from, and the data is high quality, and the pipelines to process that data are already there, typically for different reasons. Like finance is a great example, right? There's a lot of data because there's a lot of value in that data. So this is one aspect, right? So that will happen sooner. My number one experience with working with companies that they say oh, this paper is great, come talk to us and let's do something. And then what happens at the end of the day is if the pipeline that we would need to be on top of is already there, it happens, and if it's not, it doesn't happen. Because it's too much cost. And another one, just to mention one more, there's several, but another one is industries that have more free money will take up AI sooner. For example, retail, right, is an obvious great application for AI, but the margins are so low that they can't afford to have a big AI project and these days they have no choice, but if you look at, so for example, the tech companies, among other things, they have a lot of money to pour into AI, which they're doing. So there's a bunch of factors like this.
So I think that just adding on to that, so we have the question about whether you actually have the data that's necessary, and we could talk about machine learning and stuff like that, but you can think about prior cases of whatever it is that you're going to do, right? There's a question about whether or not everything is already kind of in the computer system, right? There's the pipeline for getting the data, but there also is whether the decisions are being made within the computer system, right? If they're being made within the computer system over and over again, we see that when the decisions are being made in the computer system, then AI takes over and starts to help or to just to do the job, right? And so when Amazon came along, all of a sudden merchandising decisions weren't made on the shelves at the end of the aisles, they were made on a computer screen, and all of a sudden we had AI-driven even personalized merchandising, right? And the third is just to think carefully about the things that AI is really good at. It's good at estimating values, it's good at estimating probabilities, so much better than people that it's, that it's astounding, right? And now it's actually good at conversation, right? And so if we think about now, we've changed, and now we have this leap in capability in conversation. What would be the kind of tasks, not necessarily industry, but the kind of tasks where you would have a lot of data, you would have the decisions are made within the computer system, and they involve actually being good at conversation? Customer service. Right, customer service. Generally you have huge databases of all the customer service calls, right? Customer service now is in the system. You call it up, everything's in a computer system. And now our conversational capability may well be, we have to think this through in terms of making a product out of it. We have to think about whether or not it's at the level, and probably it's at the level of the first line, of all the first line.
So I agree with almost everything that you're saying, but on customer service, so this is actually another point worth mentioning. Exactly. I mean, one of the pieces of advice that I give to sort of like companies are like, so what do we do with generative AI? It's like, because it's not reliable, you should use it. The first wave of applications, and I mean at this point I think everybody knows is for things that humans will revise and look at and polish, right? So for example, you as a Fortune 500 company should use it within the company before you use it customer facing. Because you want the same thing that happened to Air Canada to happen to you, right? You guys know about the Air Canada incident, right? Like, they had a chatbot. The chatbot made up a refund policy, and then the judge forced them to honor it because the chatbot had made it up, right? So customers, by the way, customer service has been a killer app of AI for at least 20 years.
Yeah. But I mean, I guess my point is, it's going to be this. It satisfies all of the criteria. I mean, the other criterion which we mentioned before was ability to deal with the errors made by the system. I'm getting signaled that time is up. One more quick question.
Thank you. So I'm curious, when people say when Ilya Sutskever is like, I'm going to go create a company that's going to align the AI, or when my friend's like, I'm going to go study computer science, I'm going to go get my PhD, and I'm going to figure out how to align the AI. That sounds really scary to me, because that sounds like I'm going to figure out how to give this machine universal values that we can all agree on, which obviously doesn't exist. So what does that really mean? Maybe in a less technical sense, and then in a more technical sense.
No, very good. So, by the way, so one of the characters in 2040, Arvind, the CTO, is inspired by Ilya. And he's more like Ethan is more like the salesman, the megalomaniac, the Sam Altman, right? But then Arvind, and again, Ilya is a great representative of someone who, he's technically good, but extremely naive about a lot of things, right? And by the way, what happens in 2040 is that Arvind starts to have second thoughts about Prezibot, right? And partly comes down to this, and again, this is actually, these questions have all been great, this is another crucial point about AI that I'm always hammering on. It's like there are no universal values. Our job as technologists is to create AI, our job as technologists is not to inject our values into the AI. Often under the illusion that they're universal values. Oh, we're making this AI fair because AI should always be fair. But wait, what is your definition of fairness? I mean, there's whole conferences about this now, right? So when Ilya says, I'm going to align AI, right, save superintelligence, what you should be is alarmed. Because with all the respect that I have for Ilya, I don't want AI aligned to his values. Or anybody's values in particular. Again, Prezibot 2.0, I think, is the answer. Everybody should be able to, people in India will align AI to their values. right? People in Brooklyn will align AI to their values. Like conservatives and progressives will align AI to their values, and then they'll fight it out. And this whole notion that like, and again, I understand sort of like the naive rationale behind it is like, oh, I want the world to be fair, so I'm going to make the AI enforce a notion of fairness that's then going to blow up a whole bunch of stuff, right? So, and I mean, like the community that works on this is, I think, slowly coming to this realization. But unfortunately, people like Ilya, I mean, you know, another reaction is to just be amused, which is kind of like the reaction of 24 is like, sure, Ilya, go ahead, and like, let's see how it blows up in your face, right?
Yeah.
But
I actually
the
think,
problem is
by the
if
way,
it blows up in our face, it's not
By
just
the way, I
this.
think align, this is one of the few cases where the word is actually not such a bad word, because align has to be aligned with something, right? And essentially what aligning is, as far as I can tell, is just taking a system that was trained to do one thing and then changing it a bit to be trained to do something else. And so it's kind of aligning it, right, with a new set of behaviors that you're giving it, right?
It's interesting you should say that, because I agree with what you're saying, but not with respect to the word aligning. Aligning, actually, I think, is a bad word for the following reason. It comes from this notion that we have to align the AI's values with our values. When in fact, I mean, it frames...
Aligning, I'm saying align is used for much more than just value.
No, I understand, but like, but you got to realize that there's a problem in people framing it like this, because it personifies the AI as someone who has values. Right. And like, in fact, you know, one of the things I say to people is like, we don't need the AI alignment. We just need, you know, to study control of complex systems. And again, Jan is another person who's like, and in this regard, I completely agree with him. He's like, maybe it's our background as engineers, like, you know, like, we know how to control simple systems. The thing about machine learning and AI is that systems are now more complex, and controlling them there's a whole, you know, body of work on how to do this, right? But it really still is about controlling a system with heuristics and with these metrics and blah, 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 blah. It is not aligning. You know, you can call it aligning,
align it with you align the behavior.
You can't,
right, that's right.
And align,
give it a set of behaviors.
No, very good. But now aligning behavior is a method, right? That's, for example, in robotics, you can do behavioral cloning, right? But now we're level at the method, right? But none of this, so like, I guess my objection is not to the word alignment, it's to this notion that like AI has values. Absolutely. Like, no, we have values.
Yeah. All right, we got to quit. Thank you very much for coming. This was fun.
Thank you.
And thank you all too.